Good afternoon, everyone. Today, my presentation will be focused on the mapping and mitigation of cadmium in cocoa in Central America and the Caribbean. My name is Gideon Ramtahal, and I'm from the Cocoa Research Center in Trinidad and Tobago. For my talk today, I'll give you guys a brief overview about the concerns facing cocoa-producing countries in Latin America and the Caribbean regarding their cadmium levels in cocoa beans. I will also touch on an evidence-based approach that we would have developed at the Cocoa Research Center to manage this issue. Also, where are we with respect to strategic mapping in Central America and the Caribbean to understand the severity of the cadmium problem within these countries? Well, I know by now, a lot of you guys must be aware of the cadmium concerns facing cocoa-producing countries, particularly having listened to some of the presentations earlier today. Nevertheless, please note that cadmium in cocoa is mainly a problem in the Americas, specifically within the Latin American and the Caribbean region. Now, beans from these particular regions are known to represent 80% of the fine or flavored cocoa beans in terms of our global market. Now, these beans are heavily utilized to make products that are higher in percentage cocoa solids, such as dark chocolates. And thus, there's a concern if these beans have high cadmium, the levels in the chocolates may not be able to meet the regulatory limits set by the regulatory organizations. And thus, our exports can be banned and rejected. And this can now, in turn, affect the livelihoods of farmers, the revenue that we gain for our countries, as well as the recognition that we are known for in terms of having fine or flavor quality cocoa beans. Some of these regulatory bodies include those that are set by the European Union, California Proposition 65 in the US, as well as those put forward by the Codex Alimentarius organization. Now, this cadmium issue in cocoa isn't something that is unfamiliar to us, as we have been working in this issue to build the necessary knowledge to manage the cadmium problem. A number of organizations have a number of projects, which is aimed to, of course, develop mitigation strategies and to assist farmers so we can continue our recognition having good quality cocoa beans that can continue to be exported with low levels of cadmium, of course. Now, we at the Coca Research Center are not strangers to this, as we have been working in this cadmium research for over 15 years. And because of this, we were able to develop an evidence-based systematic approach based on best science. And this particular approach is more or less contains 4 steps. One of the first steps include understanding the distribution and severity of cadmium levels in cocoa beans within a country. Now, how does one do this? Now, it is important to first understand the main cocoa growing areas within your country, knowing the number of farmers, the productivity coming out from these areas, and then divide this into main agroecological zones. Now, within these particular farms and cocoa growing areas, it is important to now sample cocoa beans as well as some soil samples to get an understanding of the severity of the cadmium problem within your particular country, and then further on may possibly try to understand the factors using the soil that contribute to cadmium uptake. This shows a strategic mapping done within the island of Trinidad, where we would have shown that the cocoa growing communities were selected in terms of the map on your left and divided in terms of the main agroecological zone, having a clear idea of the number of farmers as well as the productivity. We would have sampled cocoa beans samples in terms of the main cocoa growing areas and then analyzed them and developed a map in showing the distribution of cadmium levels in cocoa beans throughout the island, which is the map shown on your right. We can see the blue, greens represent the lower levels, but moving up from the yellows to the orange to the reds represent the levels that are of concern in terms of cadmium in beans, particularly the red ones. So this more or less gives us an understanding of the severity of the problem within a particular country. And once we are able to know the severity of the issue in terms of where are our problem areas, we can now perform a diagnostic study, which would ensure that we understand the factors that contribute to cadmium uptake. This means we take a closer look at the soil and determine the total or bioavailable levels, sources of cadmium that are contributing to contamination of soils, Physiochemical properties, including pH, organic matter, micronutrient deficiencies such as manganese and iron and zinc, salinity, soil texture, just to name a few, not leaving out that there may potentially be some genetic differences. You can also map these factors. Here we have a map showing the distribution of soil cadmium levels in Trinidad. Also, another factor in terms of the pH levels distributed throughout the island in the main cocoa growing areas. Very important, so we can now pinpoint what are the factors contributing to the severity of the cadmium levels within those problem areas within your specific country. Knowing these diagnostic results will now help us to identify the mitigation strategies, which would be site-specific, because each site may have a different approach to mitigation. Some of the interventions that you can actually use based on your diagnostic results include soil amelioration in terms of correcting micronutrient deficiencies, correcting pH, organic matter, screening for irrigation waters, fertilizers in terms of the anthropogenic sources that may be contributing to factors in terms of sources of cadmium in your cocoa farm. This is just to name a few. After developing your mitigation strategies, you can now ensure that this information meets the farmer. And this involves ensuring that you train your extension officers, also providing the necessary support systems in place for your farmers to apply these cost-effective methods effectively. So this is a summary of our evidence-based approach, and it has four core areas. One, again, to understand the severity through mapping. Two, diagnose the problem. Three, mitigate, and then provide the necessary tools for implementation. We would have taken this evidence-based approach to Central America and the Caribbean, where we are currently working with many organizations, specifically one, MOCCA, within the Central American countries, specifically El Salvador, Nicaragua, Honduras, and Guatemala. In the Caribbean, we're working with Compete Caribbean in Dominica, Belize, and St. Lucia, AVSF out of Haiti, and GCRF in Jamaica, where we hope to manage this issue through our evidence-based approach. Now, in terms of the first step, which is very important, understanding the severity issue, core in this process is strategic mapping. And this is where we are in terms of understanding our management issues within the Central American and the Caribbean region. What are we doing? We assisted countries in developing a national platform to coordinate their main actors to understand what are their roles in terms of the strategy for mapping. We assisted with the developing of protocols, sampling strategies, the GIS mapping, analytical protocols for testing. We also recommended a list of laboratories through proficiency testing that we collaborated with MOCCA, a cadmium toolkit that we shared in terms of Ecuador, and testing support in terms of MOCCA countries, where the MOCCA organization would have added an additional 100 bean and soil samples so we can get a better idea in terms of where are the main problem areas within those countries and what are the necessary steps that we need to take to manage this issue of cadmium. These are some of the presentations that we would have conducted previously in terms of training key actors, in terms of their sampling and mapping protocols, and guiding them along the process. We also, through MOCCA, were able to proficiency test 8 laboratories in terms of conducting cadmium analysis in soil, leaf, and bean samples. Based on this aptitude test, we were able to identify and recommend the laboratory for conducting the analysis of the 100 samples, in addition to any other country who may want to utilize their services for ensuring accurate analyses. These are some preliminary results and outcomes coming out of strategic mapping in El Salvador. The map in front of you only shows 100 cocoa bean samples that was provided by the MOCCA testing support. Nevertheless, we are due to get additional data from Alianza Cacao, where we hope to further populate this map so we can get a better idea of the severity of the problem areas, and then, of course, follow the subsequent steps to managing the issue. With respect to results and outcomes from the other Central American and Caribbean countries, we have already sampled and analyzed beans from Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua. And with additional assistance, we hope to add their results so we can further populate the maps, getting a better idea of the severity of the problem within their areas. Within the Caribbean, we have already started the sampling and analysis process. What are our next steps? Our next steps include having identified the severity of the problem areas within each country, then conduct a diagnostic study, taking a closer look at the soils as well as the factors that contribute to cadmium uptake. Once we have done this diagnostic study, the subsequent steps would be to recommend the necessary mitigation strategies, followed by implementation in terms of ensuring that farmers have the necessary support system. Now, based on our evidence-based strategic approach, we hope that we can have a clear understanding of the severity of the problem in terms of cadmium levels in cocoa beans within the Central American and Caribbean region, and we hope to provide them with the necessary tools that will help them to mitigate their cadmium levels in their cocoa beans. We hope that through this approach that we were able to provide farmers within the Central American and Caribbean region with a general understanding of the issue and with knowledge of best practices that are in fact costly if effective, so they can follow this management tool effectively. That brings me to the end of my presentation, guys. Thank you for your attention.